What's going on, guys? And today I'm doing a video, the 5 biggest what-ifs in recent NBA history. Now, I'm only doing recent NBA history as I'm not that old, I'm only 19, so I really don't know too much about the NBA before about Jordan's time. Of course, I really wasn't alive when he was playing. I was very young, I was about 1 or 2 when he was in his later prime in Chicago, so I can't talk too much about it. But anyways, let's actually talk about the 5 biggest what-ifs in recent NBA history. First things first, this is in no real particular order as towards the last 3 that you're going to see. I wasn't sure what was the most important, but in general it's going to be in ascending order of importance. Anyways, let's get started. At number 5, the Detroit Pistons of the mid-2000s. Now, this was a pretty successful team as they won the championship in 2004 and were constant contenders from about 2004 all the way up to about 2010 or so. And pictures on the screen, you can see the big 5 that they had. None of them are real superstars, but they were all very solid players. Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince, Ben, and Rasheed Wallace are all pictured, and that was the starting 5 for the team. However, one of the bigger questions about this team is, what if they didn't draft Darko? You see, in the 2003 draft, they got very lucky. I believe they had the Vancouver Grizzlies pick through a trade that happened years previous, and it was only top 1 protected. So as long as it wasn't number 1, the Pistons would get the pick. Now, this is the very special and infamous 2003 draft headed by LeBron James. Now, we all know what happened where the Pistons ended up kind of screwing up just a little bit in choosing Darko. Of course, that didn't affect their current or very short-term success, where they did win the title the year after and were very competitive for years to come. But what if they chose someone else? What if they decided to choose someone like Carmelo or Dwayne Wade or Chris Bosh or even Chris Kaman, Kirk Hinrich, all these very solid players they had? So let's just focus on Carmelo Anthony. Now, I'm not going to go into all the futures of the rest of the players and the rest of the teams, but what would have happened with the Pistons? Now, just imagine instead of having Tayshaun Prince, who was still a pretty solid player for quite a while, you had Carmelo Anthony instead. That brings you another great scoring option where they would have had 4 elite scoring options on the team. While of course Rasheed Wallace wasn't a true elite scorer, he was a very solid one, but that would have brought something completely different to the team. He was never a great defensive player, but he still could have been pretty solid, and that's one thing that the Pistons didn't have, was pretty much a go-to scorer. Chauncey was pretty good, as well as Rip Hamilton, but they weren't extreme go-to scorers in the way that Carmelo was. So what would have happened if they had Melo? Maybe they would have won another title or 2. Maybe instead of lasting until 2010, this Big 5, they would have stayed until maybe, current day or 2014, around that time. Now, I believe that they started to break up a little bit earlier than that, where I think Ben Wallace left a few years earlier. But point being, what would have happened if they had chose Carmelo instead? Now, we really don't know. Maybe they would have done even worse because there would have been issues where Melo wanted to play more minutes for Tayshaun, and then there was chemistry issues, and then they didn't win the title in 2004, then they had to break up the team because they wanted to build around Melo. You never know. However, this is a huge what-if because maybe the Pistons would have been a true dynasty, knocking off the Spurs, because that's when the Spurs are really dominating, or maybe the Lakers or many other teams. So that's the first what-if in recent NBA history. Moving on to the second one, which everyone always mentions. What would have happened if Shaq and Penny actually worked out together? Now, I mentioned this in one of my Kevin Durant hate videos, where people were saying that Shaq did the same thing that KD did, and I don't think so at all. It's completely different. But what would have happened if Shaq stayed on the Magic? Now, Shaq will actually go and say that he kind of wished he stayed on the Magic. I don't know if he ever said it completely outright, but he said he was very special there. And he does have a lot of love for Penny Hardaway, where he brings up guys who should be in the Hall of Fame, and almost no one thinks Penny should, but Shaq surely does. Many people say it's because Penny didn't have a long prime, as he had many injuries throughout his career, so he never really reached his true peak. However, this great team centered around Shaq and Penny broke up pretty early on. I believe this was 1995 they broke up, and that was during contract negotiations. In terms of making an extension, staying longer, Shaq wanted more money, but Orlando wouldn't budge. And now this isn't the first time that money is going to be an issue in terms of building a long-term future of a team. You see, at the time, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I believe Shaq won it's on around 20-something million a year. And at that time, that was pretty decent amount of money for in current day NBA. People who aren't frankly that great will be making close to 20 million. I like Evan Turner, but come on, making 17-18 million a year is kind of pushing it when Shaq back in the day was barely breaking 20. So basically what happened was with Shaq was that he wanted more money because he saw other people in the league getting paid pretty good salaries. He's, oh, I'm much better than them, I should get paid way more than them. Which I'm not against that idea. When you are that great of a player and your team is kind of saying, nah, you're not worth it, then you have the right to leave, or you have the right to say, I need more money or I'm going elsewhere. You saw the Dwayne Wade situation where they undercut him massively, offered him only $10 million a year, which at this point that's way less than Courtney Lee money, which is absolutely ridiculous to think about. So at that point, I don't know if he should have left. I'm not going to discuss that here, but point being, you have the right to start looking at it. So by trying to cheap out a little bit in the Magic and not going with it, he ended up bailing for the Lakers and building a short dynasty there. Now, I could talk about the Lakers dynasty, but they had great success, and why not talk about this one instead? You see, at the time, centered around Penny and Shaq, they had some other good options, and Nick Anderson and Byron Scott. You never know what could have happened, as they didn't make the finals, I believe, only 3 years in, where Shaq was only 3 years into his career and Penny was only in 2. Both were amazing players at the time and influential figures in terms of off the court, in terms of style and appearance. So what if they stayed, you know, maybe not for the rest of their careers, maybe until 2000 or 2001. You never know. With that many years together, 8 or 9 years, you didn't know what could possibly happen. Maybe they would have found some other issues, as neither was a great shooter, and of course this wasn't the really pace and space era, but you never know. Maybe they may have had some issues with that, or maybe they would have had some chemistry issues. You never know, but once again, this is a huge what if. Now moving on to a very current what if, and the main reason why I made this video is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now I'm not going to just say what if Kevin Durant never left and he stayed, because that's far too recent, and that's not the main thing behind the Thunder breakup. Now on the screen you see the Thunder Big Four on the left, and of course Reggie Jackson on the right to symbolize all the moves that the Thunder made. Now, this isn't just about KD by himself, this is about the entire Thunder organization, and about money that you just heard about in the Shaq thing as well. Now, the Thunder did an absolutely amazing job building a young core, and no one can deny that. I believe the only time you can really say previous about 2011 that they said, oh, you could have chose someone better, instead of choosing James Harden, they could have had Steph Curry. But I mean, at that point you're nitpicking and you're choosing between, I don't know, a very slim chance of ever landing the guys from Westbrook, Ibaka, and Kevin Durant, and you're saying, oh, you could have got Steph Curry. Anyways, that's a little tangent, so don't worry about that. Anyways, so the first domino fell back in, I believe, around 2012 when James Harden ended up getting traded. This is because over contract negotiations, as you saw in Shaq's case, didn't end too well. At the time, I don't know the exact figure, I believe it was around $14 million Harden was being offered, and the thing is, he wanted more. It wasn't that much more, I believe it was only $1 or $2 million more a year, as he felt he was being underpaid, but they weren't able to do it, mainly because if they did, they'd have to go into a luxury tax, and I know the luxury tax is actually pretty frightening, especially at that time when we didn't really know too much about it, in terms of how big it can get with the repeater tax and all this stuff. There are plenty of videos about this, or podcasts you can listen to about the repeater tax. I don't know too much about the CBA. However, they were nervous about this, and the Thunder ended up shipping away James Harden so they could save some money. This ended up being a horrible move on their part. Yes, they did get Steven Adams in return, who is becoming a pretty solid center who might make the All-Star game a couple times in the future. Never know that. But the thing is, what would have happened if they swallowed their pride, would have had to dish out more money and paid the luxury tax and kept James Harden? Now, they would have been paying crazy amount of money. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd estimate at least $100 million a year, as I believe that was right around what the Nets paid when they tried to do that huge rebuild, around Garnett and Pierce and all the old guys. So you never know, they might have been paying $100, $120, $130 million a year for this team, but the chance to win multiple championships, just think about how talented this team is. Now, maybe James Harden wouldn't have developed into the player he is today, but let's say he did. you're having 3 of the top probably 7 players in the league. I know James Harden didn't make the all NBA teams this year, but that's ridiculous. He averaged 29, 8, and 7. There's no way he shouldn't have missed it. Then throw in Ibaka, who was a borderline all-star and one of the better defenders in the league. We'll have a bunch of solid bench pieces in Reggie Jackson. And I know Cameron Payne would not have been available, but there was other guys they had on their bench who were pretty solid, and Daquan Cook. And of course Nick Collison, who's been there forever. So what would have happened if the Thunder and their owners are willing to open up their checkbook a little bit and say, you know what, I'll pay an extra $15 million a year or $20 million a year for us to get a title, or for us to at least contend for a title. At this point, I'd say Durant's still on the team, and Ibaka as well, and pretty much maybe not Reggie Jackson if he wanted to be a starter, and there was really no space for him at that point, but you never know what could have happened. Of course, on the flip side, he could have gotten pissed off in terms of Kevin Durant or Westbrook, where Harden wanted more shots, and then Ibaka would have just turned into almost nothingness. Do you see nowadays where he's only being a stretch 4 and he isn't trying to hustle at all? Which is kind of disheartening, especially since he's one of the more athletic players in the league. So you don't know, but if I had to put my money on it, I'd say they would have been a true franchise to contend with for the next 5 to 10 years. Alright, moving to the second one. This is one that you almost never see. What if David Robinson never got hurt in the 1996 to 1997 NBA season? Now, this is a very underrated and a whole thing that was not really acknowledged that much by anyone. And the whole reason why I mention this is because during that season he only played 6 games. I don't remember what injury he had, but he sat out pretty much the entire season. And the Spurs had a horrible season, finishing as the worst record in the league. And at that point, that ended up becoming the best thing for them ever, landing them the first pick, becoming Tim Duncan. Now, the thing is, what if he never got injured in terms of David Robinson? David Robinson was easily a top player in the 90s, very solid scorer, rebounder, defender, anything you want. I don't know too much about his game in terms of who plays like him in modern day, but go watch him. He's crazy athletic, he's jacked, he's very talented, great guy, and he's really nice off the court too, everyone says so. And I mean, he has a commercial with Latrell Sprewell or something like that. So, you know, great guy all around. But what would have happened if he never got injured? Now, not only just from the Spurs perspective, maybe they would have ended up with like the 25th pick that year. And in the 97 draft, I really don't know who was available at that spot. Of course, someone decent might have been available, but it's no Tim Duncan. And without Tim Duncan, you wouldn't have had the legacy you have now. Yes, they did get Manu and Tony Parker at later picks, and then maybe they still would have, but I think the teams that are around just Tony and Manu would not win any titles whatsoever. So without David Robinson getting hurt, maybe the Spurs don't become the dynasty they have been for the past 20 years or so, 25 years. If you include David Robinson's time as well, maybe they just become a pretty solid team with David Robinson, and then Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili still go there, but they were always just, you know, maybe a 50-win team, 45-win team, but they were never anything special. Now, not only from their point, but we also have to look at other teams. Now, say the rest of the draft goes the same way, but imagine the Spurs fall to about 25, as I mentioned earlier. The number 2 pick was actually by the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, just imagine what would have happened if Tim Duncan teamed up with Allen Iverson. Yes, this is absolutely incredible, and something that's almost never mentioned. If the Sixers actually stayed course and was pretty bad that year, and while the while the Spurs were much better, just imagine Tim Duncan teaming up with Allen Iverson. This would have probably been Allen Iverson's best teammate in his prime in terms of in Philadelphia. He did play with a pretty good Carmelo for the Nuggets, but he never played with anyone good when he was on the Sixers. At least no one who was good for a while in order to bring them to the title. He did drag a bunch of teams full of scrubs and Eric Snow and an older Dikembe Mutombo to the title back in 2000. They did lose to the Lakers. However, with Tim Duncan, you gotta assume that that team would eventually win at least 1 or 2 titles, since Duncan won 5, and pretty much none of them were solely on his own. It was built mainly around the team with, of course, David Robinson and Manu and Tony and many other solid guys and Kawhi. But you never know. You could have had a superstar team with Allen Iverson and Tim Duncan, and maybe they would have won a title 2 or 3 years later in like 98, 99, because Duncan was actually a superstar coming into his rookie year, averaging about 21, 12, and I believe 3 blocks a game. So that's a huge what if, because maybe David Robinson doesn't get hurt and doesn't sit out that year. Maybe the Spurs aren't the Spurs. Now, the biggest what if that I can think of is, what if Jordan never retired for those 2 years? Now, people always bring this up in terms of what if Jordan never retired in terms of his legacy. But the thing is, this could have affected legacies of many others. While Jordan sat out, I believe it was in 94 and 95 seasons, as he came back in the 1996 season, other teams are propping up around the league in terms of being successful. None other than probably the Houston Rockets. Now, the Rockets only won 2 titles during the 90s, and that was with Hakeem Olajuwon in 94 and 95. And you might be wondering, oh, that's kind of interesting, because that is when Michael Jordan was out of the league. Now, just imagine if Jordan was in the league. Maybe during this time, Hakeem would have never won a title. And if Hakeem never won a title, I don't know if he would have ever dashed town, kind of like what KD did. But you gotta think about it. His teams were never that great. They had some decent players in Vernon Maxwell and Otis Thorpe, but no real superstars during the 90s. Yes, they had Ralph Sampson and some other good players when he was younger, and I believe they actually might have even made a finals like in the early stages of the team in the mid to late 80s. But I don't remember that off the top of my head, but he never won a title until 94. So what would have happened if Jordan played? Yes, Jordan might have ended up with at least 8 titles, but the thing about that is Hakeem might have ended up with 0. Hakeem is generally regarded as a top 10 player of all time, probably the best defensive big since the 70s. I still think Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain were better defenders. There are maybe Kareem, but he has the record for most block shots of all time. So maybe he is just another guy that we look at as a stat sheet guy who never really accomplished anything. And the same light as Allen Iverson and Charles Barkley, guys who were amazing players but just could never win a title. Now, throwing Shaq as well, because Shaq also started to dominate with the Magic, and this is touching on the Magic franchise as well, right around the time that Jordan was gone as well. Now, Jordan, when he played from, I believe it was 92 to 94 or 90, whatever it is, when he won the first 3 titles, Shaq never made it to the finals. Then again, Shaq was only in the league for a year during that. But then also, once again, he didn't make the finals in the second three-peat, because he wasn't on the Magic for most of that. So what would have happened if he didn't make the finals at all? Because maybe Michael Jordan was there and Jordan made it during those 2 years that he was retired. Shaq might have been really pissed that Orlando wasn't good enough for him and might have forced a trade down, caused a huge scene. We never know. As I said earlier, he did like Orlando a lot, but maybe he would have gotten some hatred or some distaste towards the city because they didn't bring him enough titles or enough success. So you never know about that either. So I feel like this is the biggest what if, because 2 all-time legends could have had their futures completely changed just because one guy decided to retire and then come back. Now you never know, because maybe Hakeem would have gotten pissed after those 2 finals that he lost to Jordan or whatnot and said, you know what, I'm coming back, I'm coming out crazy, and then he just destroys Jordan in 96. In the same way that actually happened in the current day with the Cleveland Cavaliers, where the team sets a record for most wins in a season, where it was 72 wins in 96 and 73 wins in 2016. And the guy who lost previously was like, you know what, I'm not dealing with this. And even though they didn't have a superstars around them or a superstar team, they're like, whatever, we're destroying. You never know that. And then throw in the Shaq factor as well, where the skinny and athletic Shaq might have not made it to the finals and tried to get his way out, or maybe he got pissed and said, you know what, I'm sticking with the Magic, and where we're doing no matter what, we're beating Jordan. You never know, and this could change history forever. Anyways, guys, I'd like to thank you guys for watching this. Comment down below what you think about this video. I might do the biggest what ifs for players that have teams and franchises and dynasties. Let me know if you'd like to see that. Subscribe so of course you can get those videos in your sub box and you can hear about them, and share this anywhere, or share with anyone so they can learn a little bit about the NBA and talk to me about it. Anyways, guys, I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and of course, have a good day.